They stumbled into the cowboy's camp half alive and forced him to break every rule he ever made. Ethan Cole had never cared much for company. A cowboy by nature, he had grown used to the quiet and solitude of the desert. For years he roamed the vast empty plains, finding comfort in the silence that only the wilderness could offer. His camp was simple, just a fire, a saddlebag full of essentials, and his rifle. It was all he needed. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Ethan sat by the fire, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate movements. The heat of the day had passed, and the cool night air was starting to creep in. He had a long journey ahead of him tomorrow, another stretch of desert to cross. But tonight he was content. There was no one for miles, just the wide open land stretching as far as the eye could see. That peace didn't last long. Ethan heard something, a faint noise in the distance, just barely audible over the crackling of the fire. At first he thought it was the wind, but then the sound came again. Footsteps, slow and unsteady. It wasn't the usual rhythm of desert animals, and it wasn't the wind either. Someone was coming. He stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung across his back. His eye scanned the horizon, but all he could see was the dim light of the setting sun stretching across the dunes. Then, in the distance, he saw them. A figure appeared, stumbling through the sand, half collapsed, dragging themselves along the ground. A woman barely able to stay upright. She was thin, her clothes ragged, and her face pale with exhaustion. Behind her, a man followed, his body slumped, barely able to move. Ethan's heart quickened. He didn't know who they were or what had brought them to his camp, but one thing was clear: they were in trouble. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed his rifle and made his way toward them. He wasn't sure why he was helping them. Maybe it was the way the woman's body shook with each step, or maybe it was the way the man looked, lost and broken. Either way, he knew he couldn't just turn away. When he reached them, the woman collapsed at his feet, gasping for air. The man was barely conscious, leaning against a nearby rock. Ethan knelt beside them, his instincts kicking in. The woman's breathing was shallow, her face covered in sweat and dirt. Her clothes were torn and blood stained the fabric of her side. The man wasn't much better off. His eyes were glazed, his lips cracked and dry. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, his voice low but steady. The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Finally, she managed to speak, her voice trembling. "We need help. Please." Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a flask of water, offering it to the woman first. She took it gratefully, gulping it down as if she hadn't had a drink in days. The man made a sound, and Ethan offered him the flask next, but the man barely reacted, his body too weak to take the water. "What happened?" he asked. She struggled to sit up, her face pained. We were traveling. The syndicate, they're after us. We don't know how much longer we can keep running." Ethan furrowed his brow. The syndicate. He had heard the name before. They were a ruthless group, known for their merciless pursuit of those who had something they wanted. People who crossed their path rarely made it out alive. But what were two strangers doing in the middle of nowhere, running from the syndicate? "Where are you from?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the confusion swirling in his mind. The woman's eyes darted to the horizon, as though she feared being overheard. "We were part of an expedition. A scientific team. We found something the syndicate wants. They've been hunting us ever since. We've been on the run for weeks." He didn't know much about scientific expeditions, but he knew one thing. If the syndicate was after them, this wasn't just a simple case of bad luck. The syndicate didn't chase people without a reason. They were after something valuable, and the woman and her companion were caught in the middle of it. "Where are you heading?" Ethan asked, his hand resting on his rifle, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. "We don't know," the woman said, her voice cracking with emotion. We need to survive. We need to get out of here." Ethan paused. He had always kept to himself. He had always followed one simple rule: never get involved with anyone else. The desert was a harsh place, and the fewer people you trusted, the better. But something in the woman's voice made him reconsider. She wasn't just some traveler passing through. She was running from something, and so was the man. The syndicate wasn't a group that gave up easily. Ethan thought about his options. He could turn them away, send them back into the desert to fend for themselves, but he knew what would happen. They wouldn't survive long out there. The desert wasn't kind to the weak, and Ethan wasn't heartless. "I'll help you," he said, his voice firm. "But we need to move fast. If the syndicate's after you, we don't have much time." The woman's face softened with gratitude. "Thank you." Thank you so much." Ethan nodded, rising to his feet. He took a deep breath, looking over the desert landscape one last time. The land had always been his, and it was clear to him now that nothing would ever be the same. He had always been a lone wolf, surviving by his own rules. But now, with 2 strangers in his camp, those rules were being tested. He grabbed his rifle, checked his gear, and glanced at the horizon once more. The syndicate wasn't far behind, and Ethan could feel the tension building in the air. This was just the beginning. The fire crackled in the cool desert night, its glow casting long shadows across the camp. Ethan sat with his back to a large rock, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The wind had picked up, whispering through the dry, cracked earth. He wasn't sure if it was the wind or the distant hum of something larger, but something about tonight felt different, more tense. Lara, the woman, sat across from him, her face still pale but showing signs of recovery. Her eyes were distant, lost in thought. The man, Jared, was resting on a bedroll nearby. His breathing had steadied, but he was still too weak to do much more than drink water and mumble faintly in his sleep. Ethan had given them both food and water, but he knew their true strength lay in their survival skills. The desert had a way of testing a person, pushing them to their limits, and if these 2 were still alive, they had to have some will to fight. But Ethan could see the fear in their eyes. They were running from something far worse than the desert itself. Lara caught Ethan's gaze across the fire and smiled weakly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping us. I know you didn't have to." Ethan only nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He wasn't used to talking much, especially to strangers. But something about her voice, filled with desperation and fear, made him want to listen, made him want to help. "You said you were part of an expedition?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but filled with curiosity. Lara's expression darkened at the mention of the expedition. She looked down at her hands, gripping the edges of her cloak tightly. "Yes, we were part of a scientific team. We were sent to study ancient artifacts on a distant planet. It was supposed to be just another job, a simple, peaceful assignment." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Ancient artifacts? What kind of artifacts?" Lara hesitated, glancing over at Jared, who was still unconscious. She seemed to weigh her words carefully before answering.
"We found something no one was supposed to find."
"Something powerful. I don't know how to explain it. It was a device, old and forgotten. But when we activated it, we made a mistake. We triggered a signal, and that's when they came after us." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "They?" "The syndicate," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've been hunting us ever since. The device we found, it's not just a relic. It's a weapon. A key to something far more dangerous. And they want it. They'll do anything to get it." Ethan's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The syndicate wasn't just after them because they were fugitives. They were after something far more valuable, something powerful enough to make people like Lara and Jared run for their lives. But what was it? What could possibly be so dangerous that a group like the syndicate would stop at nothing to possess it? As if reading his mind, Lara spoke again. "You've heard of the syndicate, haven't you?" she asked, her voice heavy with weariness. "They don't just deal with ordinary criminals. They deal with technology, alien technology. They collect and use it, manipulate it to their own ends. That device we found, it's part of something bigger, something that could change everything." Ethan had heard the rumors before. The syndicate wasn't just some gang of thugs. They were a shadow organization that operated in the darkest corners of the galaxy. They controlled weapons, ships, even entire planets, and they would stop at nothing to get their hands on anything that could give them more power. But a device? An ancient artifact? That was something new. "And you think this artifact is in your possession now?" Ethan asked, his eyes narrowing. "What makes you think they haven't found it already?" Lara shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. "We hid it. We had no choice. The syndicate was closing in on us and we had to leave it behind. But they're still after us. They know we're the only ones who can lead them to it." Ethan stood up abruptly, the weight of her words settling in his mind. The syndicate wasn't just after 2 innocent people. It was after something far more dangerous. He could feel it now, the pressure building around them. Whatever Lara and Jared had found, whatever they were hiding, it wasn't going to end with just the syndicate chasing them. No, this was bigger. Far bigger. He turned and looked out at the horizon, his gaze scanning the desert once more. The night was quiet, too quiet, and it unsettled him. There was a feeling in the air, a sense of something approaching. It wasn't just the syndicate, it was something else. Suddenly Jared stirred, groaning softly as he shifted on his bedroll. Ethan turned to see the man's eyes flutter open. He looked disoriented, but after a moment, he seemed to focus on Ethan. "We're safe?" Jared rasped, his voice hoarse. Ethan nodded, but there was a coldness in his tone as he spoke. "For now. But I don't know how much longer that'll last. They're coming for us, aren't they?" "They'll come," Ethan said grimly. "And when they do, we'll be ready. We've been running for so long, I don't know how much longer we can keep going." Ethan knelt down beside her, his voice steady. "You'll make it. You've made it this far." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with something more than fear, something like hope, even if it was fragile. "We're not just running, Ethan. We're fighting. We can't let them get their hands on that device." "It's too dangerous! If they do, no one will be safe." Ethan felt a weight settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about him and his rules. It was about something bigger, something that could change the entire course of history, and he was caught in the middle of it. As the night grew darker, the hum of something distant reached Ethan's ears once again. It was faint, but it was there. That same noise, the one he had heard earlier, the one that, They're getting closer, Ethan muttered under his breath. Lara and Jared exchanged a look, their faces drawn with fear. It was clear that they were nearing the end of their rope. They couldn't run much longer. The syndicate was closing in, and whatever was in that device, whatever secret they had uncovered, it was only a matter of time before they would be forced to confront it. Ethan stood tall, his hand resting on his rifle. He wasn't going to run. Not this time. He had broken his own rules to help them, and now he would see it through to the end. The fire had burned low, its embers flickering against the growing chill of the night. Ethan sat on a large rock near the camp, his eyes scanning the horizon once more. The desert was vast and quiet, but that quiet held a tension, a promise of something that would soon break the stillness. He could feel it in his bones. The syndicate was coming, and he had to be ready. Lara and Jared had been silent for hours, both too weary to speak. Jared had managed to sit up, his strength slowly returning, but the fear in his eyes was hard to miss. He glanced nervously at the distant dunes, as though expecting something to appear out of the desert mist at any moment. Lara was no better off. Her eyes darted constantly between the fire and the open desert, her mind seemingly 1,000 miles away, lost in thoughts of the danger they faced. Ethan had lived a long time in the desert, but this was different. This wasn't just about surviving another day in the harsh wilderness. This was a fight for something much bigger. The syndicate wasn't just hunting them for the sake of vengeance. No, they were after the artifact, the powerful device that had turned their lives upside down. And that meant Ethan was now caught in the middle of something much larger than a simple manhunt. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself questioning his own rules. He had lived by one simple code: never get involved, never make friends, never trust anyone. But Lara and Jared were different. They weren't just strangers who had wandered into his camp. They were people in need, and for reasons Ethan still didn't fully understand, he felt a strange pull to help them. Maybe it was the desperation in their eyes, or maybe it was something else, something deeper, something he couldn't explain. "Ethan." Lara's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. "Do you think they'll find us tonight?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure. The syndicate had an uncanny ability to track people, to hunt them down with a precision that almost seemed unnatural. He had seen it before, heard the rumors of their ruthless methods. They would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, and right now what they wanted was right in front of them. "They'll come," he finally said, his voice steady, "but we'll be ready for them." Her eyes full of gratitude, but also doubt. "We can't run forever. We need to find a way to stop them, to keep them from getting what they want." Ethan's brow furrowed. The thought had crossed his mind more than once. What if there was a way to fight back? What if they could turn the tables, use the syndicate's hunt against them? It wasn't a pleasant thought, but in the desert, sometimes the only way to survive was to fight, and right now he wasn't sure if they had any other choice. Jared, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. "There's a place we can go. It's not far, but it's hidden. It might be our only shot." Ethan turned his gaze to Jared, his interest piqued. "Where is this place?" Jared hesitated, looking between Lara and Ethan. "It's an old hideout. A place where people who've crossed the syndicate go when they need to disappear. We used it once, a long time ago. It's in the mountains, deep in the desert, but it's dangerous. And it's not exactly safe. Lara looked at him sharply as if trying to read his mind. Is it worth it? Or are we just running into another trap? Jared nodded slowly, as if weighing the decision himself. It's worth it. If we can make it there, we'll have a chance to regroup. Maybe even turn things around. But it's not going to be easy. Ethan stood up, his hand resting on his rifle. We don't have much time. If the syndicate's coming, we need to move now. Lead the way. Jared nodded and slowly got to his feet, still weak from his injuries. Ethan could see that every step was a struggle, but the man's determination was clear. He wasn't going to let fear stop him. Not now, not when there was a chance to survive. Lara, too, stood and gathered her things. She didn't say anything, but her eyes held a silent promise. A promise to do whatever it took to survive. The three of them set out under the cover of night, moving quickly and quietly through the desert. The mountains weren't far, but the journey was long and treacherous. The sand was thick, and the air was dry, burning with every step they took. But there was something about the mountains that called to them. A place of refuge, a place where they might finally catch their breath. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. Every step they took seemed to echo in the stillness of the desert. The syndicate was out there, somewhere, hunting them. Ethan knew it wasn't just the artifact they wanted. They wanted power. And if they got their hands on whatever it was that Lara and Jared had found, there would be no stopping them. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to rumble. At first, it was faint, a distant vibration, but it quickly grew louder, stronger. Ethan's heart raced as he looked around, trying to figure out what was happening. Was it an earthquake or something else? Lara stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with fear. They've found us. Ethan didn't need any more confirmation. He knew that sound. It was the unmistakable hum of a syndicate transport ship. The kind that moved silently, hovering just above the ground, designed to track and catch its prey without being seen. And it was getting closer. We need to hurry, Ethan said, his voice sharp with urgency. Now. The mountains were just ahead, but the syndicate wasn't far behind. Ethan could hear the hum of the ship growing louder, and he knew they didn't have much time. The trio reached the base of the mountains, the rocky cliffs rising sharply before them. Jared, still weak, was struggling to keep up, but Ethan grabbed his arm, pulling him along. Come on, we're almost there. They reached a narrow cave entrance hidden by boulders, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through at a time. Lara was the first to go inside, followed by Jared and finally Ethan, who paused just long enough to look back at the desert. The ship was close now, its engine noise deafening, its shadow looming over the land. Ethan could see the faint outline of it against the night sky, and he knew they couldn't stay here for long. He took one last look at the desert before disappearing into the cave, the sound of the syndicate's ship fading into the distance. The cave was cold and damp, its walls rough against the skin. As Ethan stepped inside, he felt the chill of the air seep into his bones. The darkness was nearly total, save for the faint light coming from the fire they had set earlier. The small flame flickered in the distance, casting strange shadows on the jagged stone walls. They had made it here, deep within the mountains, hidden from the syndicate, for now. Ethan's breath came out in slow, deliberate exhalations as he moved toward the fire. He didn't know how long they could stay here, but it was clear they couldn't afford to wait long. The syndicate was relentless, and if they found the entrance to the cave, there was no way out. Lara and Jared were already seated by the fire, both of them weary from the trek. Jared, still weak, was slouched against a rock, while Lara sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the flames. Her face was drawn, eyes haunted by what had happened, but she said nothing. Words seemed useless now. They had all said enough. The silence stretched out, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. Ethan could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He had always been a man of few words, preferring action over conversation. But now, as he looked at the two of them, Lara, who had become a stranger, but also someone to protect, and Jared, whose injury made him fragile, Ethan knew that this was no longer just about surviving. It was about something bigger, something he couldn't ignore. The sound of footsteps crunching against the gravel outside the cave brought him back to the present. His hand instinctively went to his rifle, his senses on high alert. Was it the syndicate? Had they found them already? Lara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. They're here, she whispered. No, Ethan replied, his voice calm but firm. It's not them. Not yet. He moved cautiously toward the entrance of the cave, peering out into the darkened wilderness. His sharp eyes could make out a figure moving among the boulders low to the ground. It wasn't a syndicate soldier. Ethan recognized him instantly. "Stay back," Ethan warned as he stepped closer to the figure. The figure straightened, revealing a young man with a familiar face, one Ethan hadn't seen in years. "Ethan Cole," the man said, his voice a little too loud for the quiet night. "I didn't think I'd ever find you out here." "You shouldn't be here, Will. This place is too dangerous." Will was the last person Ethan wanted to see right now. They had crossed paths a long time ago when Will had been just a young, reckless kid looking for a way out. But Ethan had learned the hard way that people like Will didn't just disappear. They always came back when you least expected it. And when they did, it was never good news. Will didn't seem to be fazed by Ethan's cold reception. He stepped forward, his boots crunching against the ground. "I didn't come for trouble. But I know what you're dealing with. The Syndicate. I know they're after you." Ethan glanced back toward the cave, his mind racing. He didn't want to bring anyone else into this mess, especially not someone like Will. But something in the younger man's face told him that he wasn't just passing through. He was involved in this somehow, whether Ethan liked it or not. "What do you want, Will?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Will hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I can help. I know the Syndicate's movements. I've been tracking them for a while. I've seen them close. Too close. They're coming for you, Ethan. They've got their sights set on whatever it is you're hiding." Ethan didn't need to ask what he meant. The artifact. The device that had set all of this into motion. It was why they were all here. Why they were all on the run. "I'm not interested in your help," Ethan said firmly, turning away. "I don't need anyone else getting caught up in this." But Will wasn't ready to give up that easily. "You can't do this alone. I know things. I can get you the information you need to take them down." Ethan stood still for a long moment, weighing his options. His instinct told him to turn Will away, to keep things simple and stick to the plan. But he knew that wasn't enough anymore. They weren't just dealing with desperate fugitives anymore. They were dealing with an organization that had the power to crush them all. With a heavy sigh, Ethan spoke again. "Fine. You can stay, but you follow my lead. No more running, no more mistakes." Will's face lit up, but Ethan quickly raised his hand to silence him. "Don't get any ideas," Ethan warned. "The Syndicate doesn't take prisoners. You understand that?" Will nodded, his expression serious now. "I get it. No funny business." Ethan didn't feel better about the situation, but at least he wasn't alone in the fight anymore. He turned back to Lara and Jared, who had been watching the exchange with concern. "We can't stay here long. The Syndicate will be here soon. Will's going to help us, if he's telling the truth." Lara's eyes flicked from Will to Ethan. "How do we know we can trust him?" Ethan paused for a moment before answering. "I don't trust him, but we don't have many options." Jared spoke up from the corner, his voice hoarse. "What are we going to do? We can't just keep hiding. The Syndicate will find us no matter where we go." Ethan looked at him, his expression hard. "We fight back." Lara blinked, as if she hadn't expected him to say that. "Fight?"
How?
"They have more people, more weapons."
"We're just 3-4 now." Ethan's voice grew low, filled with purpose.
"We use what we have. We make them regret ever coming after us." They all fell silent, each of them weighing the gravity of what Ethan had said. He wasn't just talking about hiding or running anymore. They were going to stand their ground. Ethan turned back to Will. "You said you had information. Start talking." Will looked uneasy for a moment, but then his face hardened with determination. "The Syndicate's been after that device for years. They know exactly what it does. And they've got a plan to take you down, one way or another. But if we can get to their base, we might have a shot at stopping them." Ethan's heart pounded at the thought. He had always been a lone wolf, but now, for the first time, he felt like he was leading a team. There was no turning back. The fight was coming to them, and they had to face it head on. "Then we move at dawn," Ethan said, his voice filled with finality. "We get what we need, and we end this."